So I've just finished playing Immortal Redneck and I wanted to talk about this game. This is a small indie game, but it's actually doing a lot of things right. It's a first-person shooter, but also kind of an RPG because you collect coins and then you use them to buy yourself skills to improve your stats. And while you don't really have items, you do get lots of different weapons and lots of different scrolls, and these scrolls will change the way the game feels. But before I go into detailing the whole game, I'll actually go into my standard route and just tell you what I didn't like at first and what I liked later on. Overall, though, I can say at this point that this was actually a pretty good game when you play it the right way. And each of you will have to decide which that way will be. My way was a way that I will describe very soon. First of all, but like I mentioned, let's go with the negative things. One of the first and main problems this game has is the fact that you need to grind. So the game's difficulty increases as you move on, and the enemies are going to get more difficult, they're going to have more HP, they're going to do more damage, and if you are not upgrading yourself as you go on, and you will not be able to do that if you're just doing a single run, you're going to have a lot of trouble because the game is essentially a bunch of arenas stacked together. So you enter a room, you gotta kill everyone, and then you move on. And that's how it goes from step to step. There are these special puzzle rooms which give you a specific objective that needs to be completed, something like a time trial or something else. And these are very nice. They can refresh the game sort of, so that you don't feel like you've been doing the same stuff over and over again. But you will be doing the same stuff over and over again. And unfortunately, as I was saying, you cannot upgrade if you just play an hour or two. You're gonna have to invest a lot of time in order to upgrade your character, especially in the later levels. And the second problem I have with the game is the randomization. Now, essentially, the game has procedurally generated levels. They are, it's going to use the same templates more or less and combine them sometimes, but you know, if you play the game long enough, you're gonna be seeing the same rooms several times during one single playthrough, and this is going to be a pain simply because it does get somewhat boring when this happens. But the game's visuals are still held interesting, so for me personally that was not the case, but I will tell you soon why. There's a reason for that. I just didn't invest that many hours into the game. Of course, not just the levels are randomized, your powers are randomized. Basically, after you die, you get to choose which gods you want to use, and each god will give you different stats, different starting weapons, and that's gonna have an effect on your gameplay. However, you're being offered just a certain amount of these, and they're always shuffled. You can try to re-roll them again if you have more, but it is a random thing. That's something I don't like. And there's the thing that's called scrolls. These scrolls are dropped by enemies sometimes they just stand in a room for you to pick up. And these scrolls are awesome because they bring a sense of danger with them, in the sense that every time you pick up a scroll, you're rolling the dice. They're good and bad scrolls. And some scrolls are really gonna mess up your game. Like, they will actually make it so all the writings in the game are replaced with hieroglyphs, which really sucks, especially if you're still learning the game, because all the information you get is gonna be impossible to decipher, especially if you pick up other scrolls. You have no idea what they do. You just see this icon that could be anything, and your protagonist is gonna comment, so that's how you'll know if it's a good or a bad one, but he's not gonna tell you what it is. So I don't know how he manages to understand even which one's good or bad, but you know, that's besides the point. The randomization can be somewhat annoying for me personally. I do like having a certain map that I can, you know, learn and then use that to my advantage, because the game already puts you in a huge disadvantage the more you move on through the game, simply because the enemies get really difficult to deal with, and the grinding gets really annoying. The bosses are hard too. Now, the next point that I want to address is the fact that the story absolutely sucks. The game essentially does not have a story to begin with. You're a redneck. It seems like you're on a holiday in Egypt or something, and some aliens or something abduct you and they turn you into a mummy, and now you're immortal. Don't ask me, I don't know why this happens, and neither does the redneck, nor does the game. The game doesn't explain any of it. And as you progress and you beat the game, the ending's not going to tell you anything. I don't want to spoil it, but there really isn't much to spoil, so I'm just going to say that well, I guess I'll spoil it. Come on, it's a really lame ending. You're not going to be learning anything about the game. The ending just involves you sitting and drinking beer with an undead alien and your salesman who you hire later on and buy artifacts from. That's it. You're just sitting there drinking a beer. Game over. Well done. So the game's not gonna win you over with a story. It's gonna win you over with gameplay. The voice acting in the game is, well, I'd say this is a matter of taste, really, but I think it's pretty bad. The redneck just, first of all, he's trying to be a redneck, but he doesn't sound convincing. I've heard rednecks speak. You expect this. Well, you expect a certain accent when someone's pretending to be a redneck, and he's just not doing that good a job. That's it. I'm not convinced with that, and it's a matter of taste again. But for me, the voice acting was actually quite bad. Still, he does blabber quite a lot, so that's somewhat entertaining. His little one-liners and stuff. They get boring fast, but it's still much better than if it was quiet. So, I'll value I value that we have voice acting at all. It looks like a pretty low budget game, but a lot of love has been put into it. So, gotta give the developers credit for that. Now, the next thing that I don't like is that some weapons are downright useless. There's just a lot of weapons which shoot too slowly, do too little damage, are gimmicky, and really just useless. And I actually got killed by a boss several times because I ended up not having the right weapons. Some weapons will do quite well when you have to fight multiple enemies, like for example the Phoenix weapon, which is essentially a homing fireball that you fire, well, several small homing fireballs, and they will go for enemies and hit them. But when the boss comes and you actually have to aim at the boss specific spots, and these fireballs just fly straight towards the enemy, they don't really particularly pick a thing to hit. Yeah, you're gonna get screwed, I assure you, it's not gonna be a good time. So having the right weapon is very important, and sometimes you will not. And this is unfair because the game essentially is gonna kill you just to tell you, oh, sorry, I offered you these weapons at the beginning of this dungeon, and these weapons were good for until the boss, but the boss is the part that you're not gonna do. So why don't you go back and try again? However, trying again in this game means you're gonna be set back several floors. You clear floors inside each pyramid, and there's a mini boss in between, and then there's the last boss. And if you fail at the last boss, you appear right after the mini boss, so you got several floors to clear up again, which just blows. It blows hard, but that's how it is. Now, the game is too slow and hard because of the grinding and the difficulty spike. It just really feels unfair at some point. The game really, it seems like the developers didn't want you to finish this game in like 5-6 hours or something like that. Now the content here actually isn't that much, and what I ended up doing after I reached like the last boss of the second pyramid, and this was super hard until then. It was a lot of grinding, hours and hours, and then he kicked my ass several times, and I was like, what the fuck, Basically, I would have to now grind the second pyramid over and over until my stats are high enough, because it really feels like stat crunching here at some point. And so I cheated. I downloaded a trainer off the internet, added myself a huge amount of money, upgraded all the skills, and what do you know, I breezed through the game. I beat it in just a few hours, and the thing is that this way of playing, for me personally, was a lot of fun. I had a good time. It felt like I was never overpowered, first of all. I was just where I needed to be. Difficult to kill, but not impossible. I died a few times, but essentially, this was how the game was meant to be played. And even with everything maxed out, the last pyramid actually offered me quite a good challenge, and I died a few times in it just because I was careless. But it's just a lot more fun this way. So if you want to do it like that, and you don't want to invest tens of hours, and when I say tens of hours, I assume in order to beat this game, you're gonna need to invest at least 30 hours of gameplay. That's my assumption. Of course, I haven't done it to that extent, but I would assume that you'll need 30 hours, from which a large chunk will essentially be grinding. And you don't want to grind all day. Well, I don't want to, at least. And if you don't want to, I advise you to download the trainer and just upgrade your character and have fun, because at the end of the day, you want to have fun with the game. For me, this game was fun that way. I will probably not end up replaying it, but the time I had after I actually cheated was good time. I enjoyed it a lot, so I think that this is definitely an advice I can give you, because many people will be deterred by the idea of just killing the same people, no, not just people, but monsters over and over again, seeing the same floors, and it's going to be too tedious and not worth it at all. So it still is very much interesting to explore the place and exciting. So I don't think you lose anything by cheating here, and I don't think you have to be ashamed of it if the game essentially just wants you to stay in one place and grind all day. This is just no fun. So it's too slow and too hard. The next point is that music in the game is kind of boring. It's mostly ambient music, you know. You're gonna hear some music in the background and stuff, but it's nothing special, nothing memorable. And for a game that essentially wants you to kill lots of enemies, because in some rooms you really get a lot of enemies, um, it could have been a bit more energetic, but it's not something big to complain about. I just wanted to mention it simply because I've played Doom recently, Doom 2016, and the music in that game just was so badass. It's like the music made you feel like you're on steroids and you can't stop killing these mobs. And this game, this effect would have probably been very useful to just entice the player and motivate him to kick ass, but you're still gonna do it one way or the other, just the music's not that good. Another thing that I want to address is the game does crash sometimes. Now, it's not very frequent. I say I had like 4 crashes, and that sounds like a lot, but you gotta imagine that I probably invested 20 hours altogether, because at the beginning I was playing very seriously and I was playing very fairly, and I was not enjoying it after the first 6-7 hours. It was just more like an addiction. I wanted to see what's next. I wanted to prove something to myself before I just thought to myself, fuck this shit. But in any case, it did crash a few times, not too many times, but it's worth mentioning. Next point I want to address is that some scrolls are just way too punishing to the player. You see, when you enter one of those pyramids, you cannot choose to just exit or teleport outside and reset in any way. Your only way out of the dungeon is to die. And some of these scrolls will really mess you up bad. One of them actually, for example, gave me the option. Well, it doesn't give you an option. It created a condition that I will no longer be receiving any money. Instead, I will be receiving only meat. And meat is a small healing item. Now, the thing is, that happened to me while I was still playing fairly. So, you know, money is essentially what you gain in the game in order to upgrade your skills. It's what you would call experience in other games. So not being able to make any money means you're screwed. You're not gonna have fun, because you're gonna fight and fight and fight, and you're gonna die. It's very unlikely. It was actually certain death for me anyway. At latest at the boss I would have lost, because I was not upgraded enough at this point. So taking away the possibility for me to generate any experience or money in this case meant that after I die, I will not be able to upgrade anything. And so this grind was essentially useless now. And so I had suicide in order to start the game over. And that is just so stupid, because I had a few positive scrolls that I really liked, and you lose those as well. You know, you lose everything when you die. Of course, there are a few scrolls which will negate negative scroll effects, but it's just not worth it. I mean, you wouldn't continue and hope for the best. At least I didn't. So some of the scrolls are just way too punishing and unfair, and they will lower your fun playing the game, which is really sad. Now, next point I want to address is that the game on later stages, as I have mentioned, becomes really unfair. The higher you climb, the more HP the enemies have, the more damage they do, and your experience and money gain does not increase that significantly to justify. But the biggest problem is that, as I've mentioned before, you will at some point start to stagnate with your upgrades, because they become very expensive, and you will not be able to do significant upgrades between runs. That means you need to do several runs to do a small, improvement on yourself, so that you can then increase your chance of survival on the next floor. And that's just no fun. So, if you want to combat this, as I mentioned, do as I did, cheat the game, and you're gonna have a great time. And speaking of a great time, let's talk about the positive things in the game. Now, one of the first things that you'll notice is that the game is fast. Your character moves fast. You get double and even triple jump later. You get upgrades which make you move even faster. You don't get exhausted while sprinting. Your character can sprint infinitely, essentially. And these are things that I really like. It just makes the game feel faster and not so sluggish as some other games can sometimes be. The game generally is a lot of fun. The gunplay is awesome. Yeah, all the weapons that are good. At least it's gonna be a matter of taste, of course, again. But for me, there were a lot of weapons that I enjoyed using, and oftentimes I would take a look at weapons and switch, try them out. But of course, as always, there are a few weapons that are just much more useful than others, and those are the ones that I want to stick with. Ironically, the thing that I found out is mostly the normal pistols turn out to be the best weapons in the game. In most cases, simply because of accuracy. Most of the other weapons are just too inaccurate. They require you to stay too close. And the irony is that you get a sniper rifle, and the sniper rifle is absolute crap. It just takes too long to actually zoom in, fire. Since your right mouse button is used for your active skill, because you get one active and one passive skill with each god that you decide to work for, so to speak, to have as your deity. So since your right mouse is already occupied, how they have solved this is when you use the sniper rifle and you want to shoot at an enemy, you hold the left mouse button, which will cause a zoom in effect to occur, so that you zoom in with your scope. And as you release the button, your character will fire. This feels very counterintuitive, and the sniper rifle feels underpowered altogether. So yeah, some weapons are really useless, but the ones that are useful just feel really well. And as I've said, you have a ton of them. There are lots of weapons. And another thing that I really liked are the challenge rooms that I mentioned. There are some rooms that will make you climb up to a place upstairs at a certain time, or reach a box that you can open before without getting hurt at all, and there'll be mobs and stuff. These things can be interesting, although the time trials, I suck at them, so I didn't like those specifically. And sometimes the problem with time trials is that the indication that you're now entering a time trial feels small for me. You suddenly have enemies when you enter a room, and you concentrated on fighting. So what happened is I actually missed a few time trials. I suddenly realized that I'm actually in a time trial room, and that the time is running out and I don't have any more time, so I always fail. Another thing that happened to me was that a room wanted me to reach the end and avoid the monsters without killing anyone. Of course, you enter a room, you see monsters, the first thing you're gonna do is kill them. And that's how I instantly failed, and then realized I had failed. Before I realized it was a trial room, there needs to be a distinction that is much more obvious. They need to work on that. But other than that, they are fun, and I enjoyed them. And another thing that I like are the visuals in general. Not only is the game well optimized and runs excellently on all kinds of machines, even on weaker ones, simply because the game's models and everything aren't that detailed. It still looks pretty nice. It has nice lighting, and the different pyramids have a different tone to them. They have a different setting, and so that's cool. I enjoyed that. The game definitely looks very curious and fun. Not something you'll be complaining about, I'm sure. I sure as hell am not. And the next point I want to talk about is the interesting bosses. The bosses are challenging and at the same time curious. To fight against. You see a boss, you wonder what his attacks are gonna be, what he's gonna do. And especially after I cheated, I actually enjoyed the bosses, although I took them down fairly fast. I did die a few times again because I was not careful enough, or because the game had still screwed me with the scrolls and I had just one weapon, which would not work for the bosses. And some bosses are much harder than others, and I find that very strange. The one in the second pyramid, that boss is actually, no wait, the one in the first pyramid, I believe it was, the floating head with the fists. That boss is probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest boss in the game, which is really weird that such a difficult boss is so early in the game. And yeah, they need to work on that. Maybe swap him out against another boss later on. I think there were easier ones. Another thing that I like is that the scrolls in the game that I mentioned and complain about, they generally are an awesome idea. They make the game very interesting. They change the way the game feels. And every time you see a scroll, you're in front of a dilemma. Should I take the chance and pick up the scroll and see what happens, or should I just pass it by? And because sometimes you have had luck and you have some great scrolls, everything's working out well, and then you see another scroll, and it could potentially make things even better for you, or it could screw you over really bad. So it's a matter of taste. It's a risk and reward kind of thing. And if you're like me, you're gonna pick up pretty much every scroll you see out of curiosity. There are a lot of them, really a lot of them. I'm certain there's still some that I haven't seen, so that's great. Now, another thing I want to mention is that the classes in general are pretty cool. They offer very different types of gameplay. They make you feel different as you play them, and they have different overall stats. So some classes will be faster, more mobile, while other classes will be slower, less mobile, but do more damage and take more punishment. And you should try them because depending on the last boss, and that's really something one has to consider, the last boss is the one you want to really pick your class for. And of course, if you haven't seen that boss yet, you're probably gonna pick wrong and either have a really hard time or straight out die. But that's something that I'm willing to forgive to some extent because different classes are fun to have in general. And my last point that I want to make here before I end this review, it's going to be somewhat shorter than the others because the game is not too complicated, is that I cheated. It's a single player game, there's no shame in it, and I advise you do it too, unless you're absolutely okay with grinding hours and hours just so you can see what happens next. I think that once you cheat, the game changes completely. It becomes a much shorter game and does not overstay its welcome. And actually, I can imagine that some people would be happy to replay the game using cheats as well, just because it's so much fun and there's so much to see. Maybe I'll do it in the future too, I don't know. Right now, I think I'm good, but I enjoyed it. So if I had not cheated, this review would have looked very differently. So honestly, I think game developers need to start, enabling cheats like back in the old days where you could just write things like God mode and stuff, and so that people don't have to go on the internet and look for trainers and stuff and risk getting viruses. It sucks, and I don't know why nobody does it anymore with cheats. Cheats are used to be a fundamental part of gaming and a lot of fun. Nowadays, sometimes you even have to pay for a DLC to have some things come up, which in the past used to be cheats, things like big head mode and funny stuff like that. Well, in any case, if you are curious about this game, I would advise you give it a try. It's fun. Even if you don't cheat, it's fun at least at first before it gets really hard. And I think it's worth a shot. I think these guys are onto something, and I hope they can improve the game and make it even better. And thanks for watching my review. I hope you'll take a look at the other ones. In any case, have a great day.